The war in Ukraine, the full-scale Russian attack, now in its second month, as negotiations between the two countries are set to happen in person as soon as today. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says that his country is ready to compromise, but wants meaningful security guarantees from Western countries, adding that a peace deal is only possible if Russia pulls back all of its troops to the areas that were already occupied before the war began. ABC News Live is covering the war on the ground with ABC News senior national correspondent Terry Moran. He's in Lviv for us. Also, ABC News Prime anchor Lindsay Davis, now with us from Warsaw. Let's start with you, Terry. There in Lviv, that city, it's been a crucial crossroads for refugees and aid coming into the country. What has changed since this weekend's strike?
Well, they have been prepared for this moment. Look, there have been some strikes around Lviv, one in Lviv. These were very close, just about a mile northeast of us here and about a mile south. They were right really in the city of Lviv. And it brought everybody to the reality that millions of their fellow Ukrainians are living every day, and hundreds of thousands of people here. You meet people on the streets every day who have fled their homes in other parts of Ukraine because of Russian bombardments and attacks. And that's what happened. They were targeted. They were both military targets, a tank facility and an oil depot. But the sirens are going off pretty regularly. And so it really did bring the people here closer to the reality that so much of Ukraine is living as well. And the question about what comes next. Yes, Zelensky has announced his conditions, which include really surrendering territory to Russia on the exchange, and also guaranteeing neutrality as long as Western countries guarantee the peace deal, as long as Russia gets out of the territories that it's invaded since then. That would be a very painful deal for a lot of people in Ukraine whose husbands and fathers and sons have been fighting, and some of them dying. For what? For that kind of surrender? And the question as to whether or not President Biden's remarks on, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power about Putin would have an impact. I think it's very interesting that the one place no one is talking about that is Russia. There was a one-line statement from the press office in the Kremlin saying President Biden doesn't get to decide who the leader is. Now, why would that be? Maybe the Kremlin, maybe President Putin doesn't want the idea that he could be replaced getting around town, getting around the country in Russia. And the less said about that, the better, because his forces are getting hammered here, and he had thought they would have a great victory, and the mothers are getting the notifications about their sons, and maybe he doesn't want to stir the pot about a possible replacement for Vladimir Putin.
And the president asked about that just moments ago there at the White House, as you saw, pretty much standing firm on what he had said, clarifying a tad bit. Lindsay, now you have landed there in Poland. You are seeing firsthand now the refugee crisis and how it continues there. What are your thoughts, reflections, as you now will start reporting from Poland?
Sure. Well, shortly after we landed, we were able to get to one of the refugee centers. More than 100 of them are here across the country in Poland, where more than 2.2 million refugees have come from Ukraine. And really right now, two things that I thought were very interesting. One, people were still arriving there today for the first time. And also how it's really quite a well-oiled machine. When you come in, there's a long line. You can get your photo taken to get your ID. Then they have places that you can line up to get a bus to go to Estonia, a bus to go to Germany, a flight to go to Madrid, Spain. And so because these shelters are just these kind of temporary layover spots until you can kind of figure out more of your long-term plan. And for many of the people, this is just a place, of course, it's a far cry from being at home, but it's a place that they can be safe and warm and fed and just get a moment's peace so they can kind of figure out what the next step would be. But, there was a mom and daughter, her teenage daughter, who we got a chance to spend some time with today. And as I was talking with them, Kira, they were holding hands. And I referenced that, about the importance of family now. And the mom's response was that They hold on to each other's hands even as they sleep at night because they're afraid they're going to lose each other. And they come back. Even now they've been taken in by a family. They don't have to be at the shelter. They go back to the shelter every day to volunteer at the daycare centers because it is a way for them to keep their own spirits uplifted. And so it's really just heartbreaking to see the young kids who are still there. To hear the people who are volunteering and running the daycare talk about the kinds of pictures that they draw of brown and black suns, because that's what they were seeing before they left Ukraine, of the smoke and the devastation. And the same heartbreak still continues 1 month later.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up, Lindsay, because as we know, right, as moms, and you've written about this, I mean, art as therapy can be so tremendous for kids. Do you see these shelters just trying to do just simple things like that, art projects, just to help these kids maybe express what they can't necessarily say in words?
Sure. It's all about kind of restoring some semblance of normalcy, whether it's the snacks, whether it's the music. There was a Stevie Wonder song playing today as kids were doing little dances. And the one thing that I will say, Kira, that was so refreshing is that you did hear kids laughing, and you did hear the shrieks of joy in the midst of it all. Even though, you know, there was a mom that I talked to, had a 3-year-old daughter, a 1-year-old son, and I just asked, you know, how the kids are holding up. And mom immediately started crying, saying how her daughter cries at night and they're not able to sleep, and she wasn't able to really explain. Of course, they're too young to get any kind of explanation about war or why they're leaving home. But it is reassuring to still hear some evidence of joy and happiness and normalcy in the midst of all the heaviness and the darkness.
Well, Terry, that's definitely one thing we will not see over at the Kremlin. Vladimir Putin is not going to be dancing to Stevie Wonder songs and thinking about how joyous of occasion this is as he sits at his long table surrounded by his advisors, no doubt thinking about a possible shift in strategy right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. It is such a weird visual. Vladimir Putin alone at the end of that long table or far away in the grand room and everybody 20, 30 feet away. It's weird almost, puffy-faced and ranting and sort of almost cursing at what is happening. But you're right, there is essentially a shift on the battlefield. The Russians have acknowledged. They said that they never really intended to take the capital city of Kyiv or the entire country of Ukraine, that their intention was always just to seize and control and defend, they would say, those Russian-backed separatists, Russian-armed separatists in the east of Ukraine. Well, they can say that was their battle plan all along, but Vladimir Putin said something different. He said that the plan was to demilitarize Ukraine, meaning defeat its army in the field and wipe it out, and that certainly hasn't happened, and denazify it. He claims that the Ukrainian government, which is headed by a freely elected Jewish president, is a Nazi government. So what he means there is regime change, and they basically, the Ukrainian army has, in many places, not just stymied them, but backed them off. I talked to a pastor today who was from the town of Irpin, which is just northwest of Kiev, a commuter town basically there, which has been hard fought. The Ukrainians today claim that they took it back. And I was talking to him about that, about the fighting there, and how it affected you. And this sort of follows up on what Lindsay was saying. He quoted a Bible verse from St. Paul in which St. Paul says that you must die unto yourself and you will be risen back up in faith. And he said every day we have that experience, that every day we die. And every day we're brought back to life partly because of their successes with their spirited sons and brothers and fathers, and partly because of their faith that this is their home and they must defend it. It is an incredibly traumatic experience, a roller coaster experience, and one where they're now facing down the Russian behemoth and seeming to have some success, forcing Russia to the table this week. But it looks like any kind of deal there is still a long way off.
You know, you bring up such an important subject, Terry, and Lindsay, I know it's important to you too, and that is faith. And even here in Washington, D.C., I've met the Ukrainian clergy and even went to a mass just to meet some of the people and hear what they are talking about and what they are experiencing. And maybe, Lindsay, I bring this back to you. You know, a lot of the Ukrainian clergy really frustrated with the fact that refugees were not immediately brought to the United States. Now, finally, we hear about 100,000 will have the chance to do that. But while you're there in the shelters and among so many of the refugees that have now fled, you know, what stands out to you with regard to their faith, their resiliency, their belief that there is hope and that things will eventually work out for them? We have talked about how faithful the Ukrainians have been, and many of whom have expressed that in interviews that we have all done, and Terry experienced it firsthand there as well.
You know, I'm thinking back to a mayor that we had interviewed from actually Ukraine, and he was talking about, you know, we had already heard about how this war had been likened to David and Goliath, but many people were saying in this case, this was early on, that the Goliath was going to win, and I posed that to this mayor, and he said, but we are the people of God, and we are David, and we are going to win. And there are many churches here in Poland and many of the surrounding countries that are bringing people in and allowing people to seek shelter within the churches. But you have to imagine that faith is keeping a lot of people going. The women that I talked to today talked about that they have hopes and plans of not just returning home, but hopefully returning home soon. And, you know, I think that in a number of the scenarios, you have people who kind of lingered thinking that they might not have to even leave, you know, including that the mom who had the one-year-old son and three-year-old daughter who just took a 24-hour bus ride to arrive at that shelter. This is going to be her first night tonight. And she said that after several days, she realized that they weren't going to be able to stay under the kitchen table any longer, that was just no longer sustainable. And I do want to pass along to you, Kira, that one thing that I have found kind of interesting and exciting is the way that the mothers and children anticipate communicating with Dad back in Ukraine. And if I can tease for tonight on ABC News Live, we're going to have one of those conversations where the daughter is able to get in touch with her dad and actually have the conversation, and just the excruciating amount of time that phone rings until Dad is able to pick up, and you know that Dad is alive and he's okay. In many cases they are able to text, but nothing like that phone call and being reassured that Dad is still okay.
Nothing like hearing the voice of a parent. That is so true in a time like that when you are a child. And Terry, just one final thought, because we've been talking a lot about G7. You were there in Brussels. You know, Germany's energy minister now saying that G7 agrees to reject Moscow's demand to pay for Russian natural gas exports in rubles. So will that help siphon funds that are going towards Putin's war? This is something you've talked a lot about for weeks now. What are your thoughts as we've got a little movement on this?
Well, it sure will. It has to do with the sanctions. How deep will the sanctions bite? And when those contracts were written, Germany will buy X amount of Russian gas, or other places will buy so much Russian gas, the currency that it would be paid for in was specified in the contract, euros, dollars, whatever. Well, Putin's running out of those because of the sanctions, especially on the Russian financial system. And so he wants now to pay in rubles. Well, rubles, I mean, they're trash right now. They're worth a fraction of what they were before the war. So he wants to pay in almost worthless currency a debt, or he wants to pay in almost worthless currency, or they'd pay him, in almost worthless currency, so that it just wouldn't make any sense, he would escape the requirement that he would pay in hard currency, in actual hard currency. He doesn't have that, or as much as he did, and so what the allies are trying to do is say, you're going to go into default. And that is a devastating thing for an economy, and that's essentially what they're looking towards. Putin is saying, well, I'll pay in what I want. He's not going to win that. His people signed the contract, and it will basically harm the Russian economy. It's about the bite of the sanctions. He's trying to get out of that.
Yeah, and really hurting his people, many of whom don't believe in what's happening right now. Terry Moran, Lindsay Davis, what a great conversation. Appreciate you both so much. Thank you. And Lindsay will be following all the updates from Poland throughout the day and evening. She'll have much more tonight, as she mentioned, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on ABC News Live Prime.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.